Here, and the truth she spoke wasn't one I could ignore. It wasn't even one I could fully understand in the moment. It was simply there, glowing, pulling me toward her in ways I hadn't realized were possible. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I hadn't walked into that house searching for anything except a casual afternoon with a friend. Laughter, grilled food, the kind of summer haze that makes time feel slower. Yet from the first moment I saw her, something inside me shifted. She wasn't loud, wasn't trying to take up space. She didn't need to. The sunlight followed her, touched her hair, caught the lines of her face in ways that made everything else feel muted. When she smiled at me, I felt it in my chest like a chord struck clean on an instrument I hadn't known was inside me. But this whisper, it was different. This was no accidental charm, no casual warmth mistaken for something more. This was deliberate, a recognition, a choice. The world seemed to shrink around that single instant. The voices from the porch, the clatter of plates in the kitchen, even the hum of the summer air all fell away. All that remained was her presence beside me, the subtle brush of her arm against mine, and the words she let slip between us. I replayed them in my head, even as they were leaving her lips, memorizing the shape, the rhythm, the weight. My pulse quickened, not only because of what she had said, but because of what it implied, that she felt it too. The tension, the curiosity, the pull neither of us had named out loud. And yet, beneath the thrill, there was something else, the knowledge that nothing could remain the same. Whispers like that don't vanish in a thin air. They hang, they echo, they reshape everything that follows. I didn't answer her then. I don't think I could have, even if I tried. My throat was tight, my mind buzzing, my heart louder than any words I might have offered. But silence has a power of its own. And in that silence, I understood something I couldn't yet admit. This was the beginning of a story I wouldn't be able to walk away from. : writing ID equals 21893, variant equals creative title equals. You have no idea what you started with me. Until then, it had all been glances, laughter, and teasing remarks. A smile that lingered a second longer than necessary. A brush of fingertips against a glass. A shared laugh that seemed to belong only to us, even in a crowded room. The kind of small moments you could dismiss as coincidence if you wanted to, if you needed to. But I didn't want to dismiss them. Not really. I carried them with me after every visit, replayed them when the house was quiet, measured my steps by the possibility of seeing her again. It was subtle, quiet, unspoken, the kind of slow burn that warms you before you realize you're on fire. And then she leaned close. We were standing in the kitchen, the hum of voices from the porch drifting through the open door, the smell of lemon and cedar lingering in the air. She reached for a glass on the counter, brushing against me just enough that I could feel the warmth of her shoulder. Her hair grazed my cheek as she tilted her head, her lips barely an inch from my ear. "You have no idea what you've started with me," she whispered. The words were soft, almost too soft to be real, but they landed with the weight of a confession. My pulse stumbled, my breath caught, and the world stilled. For weeks, I had wondered if I had imagined the tension, if I had invented the sparks in the silence between us. But in that single whisper, all doubt dissolved. It wasn't just me. Her voice carried layers I didn't know how to untangle. Amusement, warning, curiosity, something fragile hidden beneath her usual ease. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a joke. It was the acknowledgement of something neither of us had chosen, but both of us felt. I turned to face her, but she had already pulled back, her expression unreadable except for the faintest curl of her lips. A smile, yes, but more than that, a challenge. My chest tightened, heat rising in my face, though I forced myself to meet her eyes. They held mine steadily, calmly, as though she were waiting to see if I would flinch. I didn't, or at least I tried not to. The moment stretched, thick with unspoken meaning. Somewhere in the background, laughter erupted, the clink of bottles and the scrape of chairs cutting through the silence. But none of it touched us. The kitchen had become a separate world, sealed off by the gravity of her whisper. In that moment, I understood something essential. We had crossed an invisible line. There would be no going back to polite small talk, No pretending her glances didn't linger or my heart didn't race at her nearness. We were suspended in a dangerous kind of honesty, the kind that reshapes everything it touches. And though I knew it would complicate everything, I felt a quiet thrill rise in me. Because the truth was simple, I didn't want to ignore it. Colon, writing ID equals 45861, variant equals creative, title equals the echo of her words. Her words kept circling in my head long after I'd left. You have no idea what you've started with me. They chased me down the quiet streets as I walked home, followed me into my room, settled into the stillness of the night like a voice that refused to fade. They weren't loud, but they didn't need to be. They carried a weight that pressed against me with every breath, reshaping the way I saw not just her, but myself. At first, I told myself it was a tease. She had always spoken in half-jokes, sly remarks, playful challenges designed to keep me off balance. But this was different. Her tone hadn't been flippant. It had been low, deliberate, steady. There was meaning in the way her eyes lingered afterward, as if daring me to understand, daring me to decide whether to step closer or retreat. I replayed the moment endlessly. The brush of her shoulder against mine, the faint warmth of her breath at my ear, the deliberate softness of her voice. Every detail burned, etched sharp in my memory. And the more I replayed it, the more I realized it wasn't only a tease. It was a warning. Because lines like that aren't spoken lightly. They ripple, they change the air, they draw a circle around everything that comes after. She knew what she was risking, and she knew I would feel it. It was her way of telling me that the ground had shifted beneath our feet, that we were no longer playing with harmless sparks. It was also a promise. Because in her words, I heard something more than caution. I heard desire, curiosity, a confession too carefully buried to speak outright. She wasn't just warning me to be careful. She was admitting, in her own way, that she was already drawn in, already caught. And if I pressed forward, she wouldn't turn away. That truth was what unsettled me most. Because until then, I had thought the tension between us was one-sided, a fantasy spun from my own overactive heart. But now, I couldn't hide behind that excuse. She felt it too. She had named it, even if indirectly. And by naming it, she had placed the choice in my hands. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, the echo of her voice threading through me. The words carried a weight I wasn't sure I was ready for, but I also couldn't ignore. My pulse still quickened when I thought of her. My chest tightened at the memory of her smile. My mind spun with what might happen if I stepped beyond the safety of silence. Her whisper was more than a moment. It was a turning point, a fracture line running beneath the surface of everything familiar. I knew, deep down, that nothing would be the same again. And as much as I feared what that meant, a part of me welcomed it. Because some truths, once spoken, aren't meant to be forgotten. Writing ID equals 32477, variant equals creative, title equals what you've started with me. She brushed past me, close enough that her breath stirred the air against my ear, and whispered, "You have no idea what you started with me." The words stayed lodged in my chest, burning long after she'd stepped away. They weren't loud, weren't meant for anyone else, just a secret folded neatly into the space between us. But they carry the kind of weight that shifts the ground beneath your feet. For weeks, our connection had lived in subtleties. A glance held a beat too long, laughter that seemed to linger in the air, fingertips brushing in ways that could almost be dismissed as accidental. It was easy, then, to tell myself it was nothing, that I was imagining it. But her whisper cut through every excuse. It was the first time she named it, the first time she acknowledged aloud that there was something dangerous, magnetic, real pulling at both of us. I stood frozen for a moment, my pulse loud in my ears, my throat tight. She had already crossed the room, casual as ever, as though she hadn't just unraveled me with a single sentence. She laughed lightly at something someone else said, her shoulders relaxed, her movements effortless. Anyone watching would think she was untouched by what had just passed between us. But I knew better, because her voice still lingered in me, low and deliberate, threaded with meanings I wasn't sure I could untangle. Part warning, part challenge, part confession. I caught her eyes across the room, and for the briefest moment, her smile curved just enough to let me know she remembered what she'd said. She meant it. The rest of the evening blurred. I moved through conversations, nodded at jokes, pretended to be present, but my thoughts spun relentlessly around her words. What had I started? What did she mean? And most of all, what would come next? When I finally stepped outside into the cool night air, the question followed me. The stars above were sharp, clear, the world suddenly feeling too wide, too full of possibility. My chest ached with the weight of her whisper, a mix of fear and exhilaration I couldn't shake. I knew there was no undoing it, no pretending it hadn't happened. She had planted a truth inside me, and it was already taking root. Her words weren't just a tease. They were a marker, a boundary crossed, a line drawn. They said, I see what you're doing. I feel it too. And now, we're in this together, whether we admit it or not. I walked away with the echo of her voice replaying in my head, knowing I'd never hear silence the same way again. Because once someone whispers something like that into your ear, the world doesn't return to normal. It shifts, and the fire it lights doesn't go out. It waits, smoldering, ready for the moment you decide to step into it fully. Writing ID equals 67214, variant equals creative, title equals rarely ends well. Oh, really? She said, raising an eyebrow. Her voice was velvet wrapped around steel, smooth yet edged with something sharp enough to cut. I had tried to match her tone, to toss back a line that proved I wasn't intimidated, that I could keep up with her. But the way she looked at me, steady, amused, measuring, made it clear she saw through every layer of bravado I wore. I've heard that before, she continued, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. And it rarely ends well. She leaned a fraction closer, so close I could see the way the light caught in her eyes, a glint that was both playful and dangerous. The subtle curve of her mouth deepened. Not quite a smirk, not quite a laugh. Something between the two, something private, as if she was sharing a secret I hadn't earned yet. The air thickened. The sounds of the house, voices in another room, the faint hum of a fan, the soft clatter of dishes in the sink, seemed to blur into the background. All I could focus on was her, the warmth radiating from her presence, the magnetic pull of her gaze. She wasn't flirting in the clumsy, surface-level way I was used to. This was different. It was deliberate, controlled, laced with an intimacy that made my chest tighten. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. My rehearsed confidence faltered, leaving me bare under the weight of her attention. I wanted to look away, to break the tension, but something in me refused. It was a test, I realized, a quiet, unspoken challenge to see if I could stand my ground. I think I can handle it, I said, the words uneven, my voice betraying more hesitation than I wanted. Her smile softened, just barely, but her eyes never wavered. She tilted her head slightly, studying me as though I were a puzzle she hadn't quite solved. You think, she echoed, drawing out the words, savoring them. That's the problem. You think. But this, she gestured lightly between us, her fingers brushing the counter, her arm so near mine I could feel the faint warmth of her skin, isn't about thinking. It's about knowing. The silence that followed was heavy, humming with unspoken meaning. My pulse raced, my thoughts tangled, and yet beneath the nerves there was something else, a flicker of exhilaration. Because even as she teased, even as she warned, she hadn't walked away. She was still here, still leaning close, still meeting my eyes with that same unshakable intensity. And in that closeness, I realized something simple but undeniable. I wanted to keep standing in the fire of her gaze, no matter how dangerous it might be. Her laughter, soft and low, broke the tension just enough to let me breathe again. Careful, she said, her voice carrying the weight of both a warning and an invitation. You might just surprise yourself. And as she turned back to her glass, the glint of amusement still in her eyes, I knew she had already surprised me. Writing ID equals 55293, variant equals creative title equals something had begun later. When the room had emptied and the night pressed quiet against the windows, I realized her words weren't meant to be forgotten. They were meant to haunt me, to follow me, to remind me that something had begun, something neither of us could easily stop. The house was still, the chatter and laughter long faded, only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a distant clock filling the silence. I should have been exhausted, but I wasn't. Sleep was impossible. Her voice, soft, deliberate, threaded with meaning, had worked its way into me, refusing to loosen its grip. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the pattern of moonlight spilling through the blinds. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, the curve of her smile, the way her gaze lingered a heartbeat too long. And always, always the echo of that whisper. You have no idea what you've started with me. It wasn't just the words. It was the certainty in her tone, as if she knew something I didn't yet, as if she had already glimpsed where this would lead, while I was still stumbling in the dark, pretending I could choose to turn back. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that I was reading too much into it. But denial felt hollow. The truth was already there, pulsing beneath the surface, undeniable. A shift had happened between us, subtle but seismic, and no amount of pretending could erase it. I remembered the brush of her shoulder against mine, the warmth of her breath at my ear, the deliberate softness of her voice. None of it was accidental. She had chosen that moment, chosen those words, chosen to leave me with something that would replay endlessly in the quiet hours. A warning, a promise, a truth. I rose and paced the room, restless, my body humming with energy I couldn't contain. Part of me wanted to run from it, to put distance between us before the pull grew stronger. But a deeper part, one I couldn't silence, wanted the opposite, wanted to move closer, to see just how far this would go, no matter the cost. Her whisper was more than a spark. It was a key turned in a lock I hadn't realized existed, a door swinging open onto something vast and unknown. And once open, doors like that don't close again. I pressed my palms to my face, trying to steady my breath, but the truth settled in with unshakable clarity. She had changed everything with a single sentence. And though the night stretched long and empty before me, I knew I wasn't alone in it. Because I could still feel the ghost of her whisper in my ear, words that had sunk deeper than either of us had admitted aloud. You have no idea what you've started with me. It was there in the way her eyes flicked toward me when she thought no one else would notice. It was there in the way my pulse spiked the moment I caught her glance. The world hadn't shifted for anyone else, but between us, the air was charged, humming with a secret only we could hear. I tried to act natural, to join the conversation, to let the flow of chatter carry me. But it was impossible to ignore the way her presence pulled at me, a quiet gravity I couldn't resist. Every detail sharpened, the tilt of her head when she listened, the rhythm of her laughter, the faint curve at the corner of her mouth when she caught me looking. We didn't speak of it. Not yet. That was part of the tension, the unspoken pact to carry on as if nothing had shifted, when in truth everything had. The restraint was its own form of intimacy, binding us tighter than words could. At one point, she drifted closer, weaving through the small crowd with that effortless grace of hers. She stood beside me, her arm brushing mine, a contact so brief it could be dismissed, yet deliberate enough to send a jolt through me. "Enjoying yourself?" she asked, her voice casual, perfectly pitched to sound like small talk. But I heard it, the undercurrent, the echo of what she'd whispered before, folded into the syllables like a hidden code. My throat tightened as I nodded, forcing a smile. "Good," she said, her lips curving, her eyes holding mine for a fraction longer than necessary. Then she turned back to the room, as though she hadn't just set my thoughts spiraling again. It was maddening, the way she could do that, slip a knife between the ribs with a single glance, then glide away before I could catch my breath. And yet I wanted more of it, needed more of it. The evening stretched on, conversations rising and falling around us. But through it all, the truth hummed beneath the surface. It wasn't in the words we spoke, but in the silence between them, in the current we both felt but never named. By the time I left, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever had begun between us wasn't fading. It was building, gathering strength in the spaces where no one else could see. And the next time, I suspected there would be no pretending at all.